A small-town courthouse and its surrounding community, warehouse district, modest apartment, hospital rehab wing. Marcus Bennett is on trial for an armed robbery at Corrigan's warehouse that he did not commit. Evidence was planted to protect the real thief, his own employer. Nadia's late mother was a physical therapist who had privately treated Judge Whitfield's paralysis before her death, leaving behind a notebook of therapy notes revealing his injury has a nerve-based but psychologically blocked component. And Nadia has been secretly continuing her mother's exercises with him without full understanding of who he was, until this moment collides with her father's trial. A torn shipping manifest page found in Marcus's coat pocket by Nadia, which doesn't match the timeline the prosecution gave. The judge, stunned by Nadia's outburst, allows a 48-hour recess instead of immediate sentencing. Corrigan has bribed a warehouse supervisor to falsify time logs and has threatened the one witness who could clear Marcus. The witness, an elderly night shift guard, is run off the road and hospitalized before he can testify. Back in the same courtroom, the guard testifies from a wheelchair. The real manifest is presented. Corrigan's bribery is exposed on a recovered voice recording. Marcus is exonerated, and Nadia, using her mother's notes, helps Judge Whitfield take his first supported steps in front of the stunned court. Her father is freed. The judge, with braces and Nadia's steady hand, stands and takes several halting steps across the courtroom floor. Emotional ending. The courtroom that once laughed at a promise now watches it become truth video by video. Nadia Bennett had never spoken in a courtroom before. She was 11 years old, and the only thing she carried besides her school backpack was her mother's old spiral notebook, its cover soft and cracked from 3 years of being opened and closed by careful hands. She stood at the edge of the gallery rail, her sneakers barely making a sound on the tile, and she said the sentence that would follow her for the rest of her life. "Free my daddy," she said, "and I'll make you walk." The words landed in the courtroom like a dropped tray of glasses. For one full second, nobody moved. Then the laughter started. First a snicker from someone in the back row, then a ripple through the gallery, then the bailiff himself pressing a hand over his mouth to hide a smile he couldn't quite stop. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over her keys, unsure whether to type it or wait for the judge to strike it from the record. Judge Harold Whitfield did not laugh. He sat very still behind the bench, in the wheelchair that had been custom-fitted to the raised judicial platform 2 years earlier, and he looked at the small girl standing where no 11-year-old had any business standing. And for reasons he could not explain to himself, the laughter around him sounded very far away. "Bailiff," he finally said, his voice flat, "remove the child." "No," Nadia said, and her voice did not shake, though her hands, wrapped around the notebook, were white-knuckled. "You don't understand. I know how. My mama knew how." She wrote it down. "Young lady, this is a courtroom, not a—" "You've been in that chair 2 years and 4 months, Nadia said. "You had the accident on Route 9, near the Millbrook exit, in November. Your left leg has feeling below the knee sometimes, especially in the mornings, but you don't tell anybody because you're scared what it means if the doctors are right, and it's not your spine at all." The room had gone silent in a different way now. Not amused silence, the other kind. The judge's jaw tightened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because my mama was your physical therapist," Nadia said, "before she died. Her name was Ruth Bennett, and she wrote everything down in this book because she said you were the most stubborn patient she ever had, and she was worried nobody would finish what she started." For the first time in 2 years, Judge Harold Whitfield had absolutely nothing to say. He recovered his composure the way he always did, by retreating into procedure. He banged the gavel, called for order, and had Nadia escorted to sit with her aunt in the gallery. But he did not sentence Marcus Bennett that day, as everyone had expected him to. Instead, in a decision that surprised the entire courtroom, he granted a 48-hour recess, muttering something about needing to review irregularities in the evidence timeline that satisfied absolutely no one, least of all himself. It was, Nadia would later understand, the first small crack in a wall that had been built very carefully by people with a great deal to lose. Marcus Bennett had worked at Corrigan Freight and Storage for 6 years. He was the kind of foreman who showed up early, stayed late, and knew every employee's name and half their family troubles besides. He had never so much as taken a stapler home that wasn't his. So when armed men robbed the warehouse's cash office of $41,000 on a Tuesday night in March, and the surveillance timeline showed Marcus's badge swiping into the building 14 minutes before the alarm tripped, it did not occur to him that anyone would believe he'd done it. He was wrong. The prosecution's case was simple and devastating. Badge access, a partial print on the cash drawer that a rushed lab tech matched to Marcus with 60% confidence, and testimony from the warehouse's night supervisor, a nervous man named P.D. Voss, who swore under oath that he'd seen Marcus near the office minutes before the alarm. Marcus's public defender, an overworked young woman named Ms. Odom who was juggling 11 other cases that same week, had not had time to pull the full shipping logs, had not had time to interview the other night shift workers, had not had time, really, to do much of anything except stand beside Marcus and watch the case slip away from both of them. What nobody in that courtroom knew, except now the judge, was that Nadia had been going through her father's coat pockets 3 nights earlier, looking for a $5 bill for a school fundraiser, when she found a torn scrap of paper stuffed deep in the lining. It was part of a shipping manifest, water-stained, with a timestamp that put deliveries moving through the loading dock at 9:47 p.m., 4 minutes after her father's badge had supposedly swiped him into the cash office on the other side of the building. She hadn't understood, at first, why it mattered. She was 11, but she'd shown it to her aunt, who'd shown it to Ms. Odom, who had looked at it for a long moment and said the words that changed everything. "This isn't in the file the prosecution gave us." Someone had left a page out of the evidence packet, and in a small town where the warehouse owner sat on the same charity board as 3 of the county's judges, left out rarely meant an accident. The 48-hour recess gave Ms. Odom just enough time to do what she should have had weeks to do. She requested the full, unredacted shipping manifest from Corrigan Freight. She was denied, twice, on grounds of proprietary logistics information, until she filed an emergency motion that landed, by chance, on the desk of a judge who, for once, was in no mood to rubber stamp anything Dale Corrigan's lawyers asked for. Dale Corrigan was not used to being questioned. He owned half the warehouse district and had donated generously enough to enough local campaigns that most people in town had learned not to ask him direct questions. He was also, though almost no one knew it yet, the man who had personally walked out of his own cash office at 9:43 p.m. that March night, for minutes before the alarm, with a duffel bag heavy enough that he'd had to shift it twice to get a better grip. Corrigan had debts, real estate debts, from a strip mall project that had collapsed the year before, debts that a $41,000 insurance payout on a robbery would go a long way toward quieting, especially with a scapegoat as convenient as a foreman who'd once argued with him publicly about unpaid overtime. He had needed someone to blame. Marcus Bennett, who'd filed 2 overtime complaints in the past year, was simply convenient. P.D. Voss, the night supervisor whose testimony had helped convict Marcus in the first place, had not lied entirely out of malice. He had lied because Corrigan held his mortgage. Literally, through a private loan Corrigan had extended him 2 years earlier when Voss's wife got sick, and because Corrigan had made it very clear in the particular gentle way powerful men make things clear without ever raising their voice. What would happen to that loan if Voss didn't cooperate? There was one more witness who could have told the truth from the beginning, an elderly night shift security guard named Walter Higgins, who had actually been at the loading dock at 9:47 that night and had seen Corrigan himself leaving through the side exit with the duffel bag. Walter hadn't come forward. He was 68, 3 years from a pension he desperately needed, and he had children of his own to think about. Ms. Odom found him on the second day of the recess. He wouldn't talk to her at first, but when she mentioned that a little girl had stood up in open court and made a promise to a judge in a wheelchair, something in the old man's face changed. "That's Ruth Bennett's girl," he said quietly. "I remember Ruth. She used to bring soup to the guard shack on cold nights. Good woman. She's asking people to tell the truth," Ms. Odom said. "That's all. Just the truth." Walter Higgins was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he'd testify. Corrigan found out within hours. He always found out. That night, as Walter Higgins drove home from the grocery store, a dark pickup truck ran him off the county road just past the Millbrook exit. The same stretch of highway, though no one would remark on the coincidence until much later, where Judge Whitfield's own accident had happened 2 years before. Walter's car rolled twice into the ditch. He was airlifted to the regional hospital with a fractured pelvis and a concussion, and for one full day, it was not clear whether he would be well enough to testify at all, or whether he would testify from a hospital bed with a police guard outside the door. Nadia heard about it from her aunt, who tried to soften the words and failed. She sat on the edge of her bed that night with her mother's notebook open in her lap, tracing her fingers over Ruth Bennett's careful handwriting, past the pages of exercises and anatomical diagrams to a section near the back that her mother had labeled simply, "For HW, do not give up on this one. He is more afraid than angry. Fear looks like anger when you don't know its name." Nadia had read that page 100 times without understanding it. Now, for the first time, she understood exactly who HW was. She thought about the judge sitting alone behind that big wooden bench, pretending his legs didn't matter to him, the same way her father used to pretend the overtime pay didn't matter, the same way grown-ups pretended about a lot of things when the truth was too heavy to hold in a room full of people watching. She decided, that night, that she was not going to be afraid of a courtroom either. The trial resumed on a Thursday morning, and the gallery was fuller than it had been all week. Word travels fast in a small town, and word of what the Bennett girl had said to the judge had traveled faster than most. Walter Higgins was wheeled into the courtroom on a hospital gurney, his pelvis in a brace, his face pale, but his eyes clear. He testified that he had seen Dale Corrigan leaving the cash office at 9:43 p.m. with a duffel bag, for minutes before the alarm sounded, and that he had recognized Corrigan's silver watch catching the loading dock light because Corrigan wore it every single day and had for as long as Walter had worked there. Ms. Odom submitted the torn manifest page, along with the full, unredacted shipping log that had finally been forced out of Corrigan Freight's records, a log that placed Marcus Bennett on the opposite side of the building, supervising a late delivery, at the exact minute the prosecution had claimed he was standing over the cash drawer. Then Detective Reyes, who had reopened the investigation 2 days earlier after reviewing the manifest discrepancy himself, took the stand and revealed the piece of evidence that finished what Walter Higgins had started, a voicemail recovered from P.D. Voss's old phone during a search connected to the hit-and-run investigation, in which Dale Corrigan's voice could be clearly heard reminding Voss that a man in his financial position couldn't afford to remember things wrong. Corrigan's lawyer objected 11 times in the space of 20 minutes. It did not matter. The room had already made up its mind, and so, visibly, had the judge. Dale Corrigan did not confess outright. Men like him rarely do. He tried first to claim the voicemail was taken out of context, then that Walter Higgins was mistaken about the watch. Then, finally, when Judge Whitfield asked him directly to explain the insurance claim filed the same week as his failed real estate deal, he simply stopped talking altogether and stared at the defense table as though the answer might be written there. It wasn't. But the truth, by then, no longer needed his help to be heard. Judge Whitfield vacated Marcus Bennett's conviction that afternoon and ordered his immediate release. He referred Dale Corrigan's case to the district attorney for charges of robbery, insurance fraud, witness tampering, and, pending further investigation into the hit and run, considerably more. P.D. Voss, given the choice to cooperate fully, did. Marcus Bennett walked out of the holding area free, into a hallway where his daughter was waiting, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing that needed saying. It was Nadia who asked, quietly, if she could see the judge before everyone left. What happened next was never officially part of the court record, though half the gallery stayed to watch it happen, and someone's phone recording of it would end up shared across the county within a week. Nadia walked to the front of the courtroom, opened her mother's notebook to the page marked for HW, and asked Judge Whitfield if he remembered a woman named Ruth who used to make him do the same 3 exercises every single visit, no matter how much he complained about them. The judge's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair. "I remember," he said quietly. "She was the only person who ever told me the truth about what was actually wrong with my legs. Everyone else just handed me a diagnosis and a chair. She said your spine wasn't broken enough to explain everything," Nadia said, reading carefully from the notebook. "She said some of it was nerves that got scared and forgot how to talk to your legs. She said with the right therapy and enough time and someone who believed you could do it." Nadia looked up. "She never got to finish. But I kept doing the exercises with you when you let the physical therapist come by chambers, even though you didn't know it was me who wrote the notes for her sometimes. I've been doing them with you for 8 months." The courtroom had gone very quiet. Even the bailiff had stopped pretending to be busy with paperwork. Judge Whitfield looked at the small girl in front of him, and at the notebook in her hands, and something in his face, something that had been locked very tightly for 2 years and 4 months, came loose. "Help me up," he said. It was not fast, and it was not graceful. Nadia braced his arm exactly the way the notebook described, exactly the way she'd practiced 100 quiet afternoons in his chambers when everyone assumed she was just a physical therapist's assistant filling out paperwork. His leg braces, which he wore under his robe every single day out of stubborn habit, caught and held. His hands shook on the walker someone hurriedly wheeled over. And then, one halting, trembling step at a time, Judge Harold Whitfield stood up from the wheelchair he had not left in open court in 2 years and walked. 4 steps, then 5. Then he had to stop, breathing hard, gripping the walker, tears on his face that he did not try to hide from a courtroom that, 1 week earlier, had laughed at the very idea that this moment could happen. Nobody laughed now. 6 months later, Marcus Bennett was back at work. Not at Corgan Freight, which had been sold off in pieces to cover restitution and legal fees, but at a new logistics company 2 towns over that had specifically sought him out after hearing his story. P.D. Voss, having cooperated fully with the investigation and avoided prison as a result, sent Marcus a handwritten apology that Marcus kept in a drawer, not because he'd forgiven everything, but because he believed people deserved the chance to keep trying. Walter Higgins recovered enough to walk his granddaughter down the aisle at her wedding that spring. Leaning on a cane he liked to say he'd earned twice over. Judge Whitfield still used a wheelchair most days. Recovery, as Ruth Bennett's notes had always said, was slow and did not owe anyone a straight line. But he walked, with braces and effort, and Nadia sometimes still beside him, at least a little further every month. He'd started a program at the courthouse, funded quietly out of his own pocket, that connected wrongfully accused defendants with real, fully funded legal representation, something he called, without much explanation to anyone who asked, Ruth's Fund. Nadia kept the notebook. She'd started adding her own notes to the back pages, in handwriting that was starting, slowly, to look like her mother's. She still remembers the way the whole courtroom laughed at her that first day. She doesn't mind it anymore. She started to think laughter is just what people do right before they're proven wrong. What would you have done, sitting in that gallery, watching a little girl make an impossible promise to a judge who'd stopped believing in impossible things? Would you have laughed with the crowd, or would you have listened? If this story moved you, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of quiet courage and hard-won justice.